The reason why I am so passionate about dyslexia is because of being a dyslexic person myself.
For years, whispers echoed through the corridors of Buckingham Palace, whispers about Prince Andrew's quiet removal, the disgrace that followed, and the royal family's desperate attempt to bury the truth. But now, Princess Beatrice has spoken, and what she revealed about her father's banishment has left the monarchy trembling to its very core. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. When Beatrice's words first broke through the silence, they carried a weight few could comprehend. She didn't speak as a royal, bound by duty, or as a public figure coached by palace advisors. She spoke as a daughter. Her voice trembled with emotion as she recalled the night her father's life changed forever. The monarchy had called it a necessary withdrawal, but Beatrice revealed it was something far colder. She said her father didn't step back willingly, he was pushed, cornered by forces within the palace that deemed him a liability. That confession alone sent shockwaves across the nation, dismantling the carefully crafted image of unity that the royal family had fought to maintain. Her revelation painted a portrait of heartbreak. She spoke of the heavy burden of silence, how she and her sister, Eugenie, were told to smile at public events, while their father's name was erased from official gatherings. Every appearance became an act of endurance, every photograph a mask over quiet suffering. Beatrice revealed how, behind those polished smiles, she struggled with anger and confusion, unable to understand how the institution her family served could so easily turn its back on one of their own. And yet, through it all, she said her father never spoke a word against the monarchy. He bore his punishment in silence, perhaps believing that loyalty, even in exile, would one day redeem him. The confession struck at the heart of public perception. For years, the world had believed that Prince Andrew's disappearance from royal duties was voluntary, an act of self-imposed retreat. But Beatrice's emotional admission shattered that illusion. She described private moments when her father, once a confident and commanding figure, sat in silence, eyes distant, as though haunted by the weight of an unseen verdict. The world had seen the headlines, but Beatrice had lived the aftermath, the shame, the whispers, and the suffocating isolation that no crown could protect against. In her account, the late Queen's compassion emerged in sharp contrast to the cold machinery of the institution. Beatrice revealed that her grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, had done everything in her power to shield her granddaughters from the worst of it. Yet even the Queen's influence had limits, as Beatrice recalled. The decision to banish Andrew was not just a matter of public image. It was a matter of survival for the monarchy itself. And for the first time, she hinted that those who orchestrated his downfall were still at the heart of the royal establishment today. The public's reaction was instant and divided. Some praised Beatrice for her bravery, calling her the first royal in decades to speak with genuine humanity. Others condemned her, accusing her of stirring old scandals that should have been left buried. But the damage was done. The silence was broken, and the royal family could no longer pretend that their unity was untouched. What began as one daughter's emotional confession had become a national reckoning, one that threatened to expose secrets far beyond her father's fate. And as the dust began to settle, it became clear that Beatrice's words carried more than emotion, they carried a hidden truth. In her trembling voice, she hinted that her father's exile had been orchestrated for reasons much darker than the public was told. Something deeper, something buried within the palace walls, had driven the decision. But Beatrice's revelation was just the beginning, because her words hinted at something far darker than anyone had imagined. The royal family called it a withdrawal from public life. But those who know the truth call it something else entirely, a banishment cloaked in diplomacy. Behind closed doors, Prince Andrew's fate was sealed not by scandal alone, but by forces within the royal household determined to erase his presence forever. What the world saw as an act of responsibility was, in truth, a calculated removal, a quiet purge disguised as dignity. The palace didn't strip him of his titles overnight. It dismantled his life in silence, one meeting, one decree, one erasure at a time. It all began with a meeting few outside the palace walls even knew occurred. Late-night discussions between senior advisors and select royals turned into an unspoken trial, where decisions were made not by justice but by fear. The fear that the monarchy's centuries-old legacy would crumble under the weight of a single man's controversy. What they couldn't predict, however, was the personal devastation it would bring to his family, especially to his daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie, who were left to watch their father vanish in plain sight. They were told to smile, to carry on with royal duties, and to maintain composure as if nothing had changed. But behind those polite smiles were daughters, mourning a living father exiled by the institution he served. In hushed conversations among palace staff, Andrew became known as the Forgotten Prince. His name was removed from schedules, his photos quietly replaced, and his seat at royal gatherings left empty. Each omission was deliberate, each silence rehearsed. The monarchy's image had to be protected at any cost, even if that meant turning their own blood into a ghost. The institution that once praised Andrew for his service now spoke of him only in whispers. Letters went unanswered. Invitations were never sent. The man who had once walked proudly beside his mother at state events now found himself walking alone in his own home, cut off from the very world he helped uphold. Behind this cold orchestration was a rising tension between Andrew and his elder brother, now King Charles. Their relationship, once held together by shared duty, fractured under the strain of royal politics. As Charles prepared to ascend the throne, Andrew became the shadow he could no longer afford to carry. Advisors pushed Charles to distance himself, warning that his brother's presence would taint his reign before it even began. To protect the crown, they argued, Andrew had to disappear permanently. And though Charles hesitated, the machinery of the monarchy moved without mercy. The decision was made, the signature inked. The prince, once central to royal affairs, was cast into silence. But what truly haunted Beatrice was not her father's exile, it was the silence that followed. No one dared to speak of him. The institution's message was clear. Loyalty meant compliance, and questioning the system meant betrayal. Yet deep inside, Beatrice's loyalty wasn't to the monarchy, it was to her father. The same man who taught her to stand tall beneath the weight of a crown was now a prisoner of its power. Each passing day, her resentment grew not only toward those who banished him, but toward the invisible walls that demanded her obedience. Still, she remained quiet. Years passed, and the world forgot, but she didn't. Because Beatrice knew the story the world was told wasn't the truth. It was a script written by those desperate to protect the crown at any cost. And that truth, buried beneath royal secrecy and public pretense, burned in her heart like an unanswered question. But what made Beatrice speak now after all these years of silence? The answer lies in what she discovered. It began with a single envelope faded, sealed with the royal crest, hidden among her father's private papers. When Beatrice opened it, she uncovered truth so disturbing that it redefined everything she believed about loyalty, justice, and the monarchy's inner workings. It wasn't just a letter, it was a weapon disguised as correspondence, a carefully crafted confession written by someone who understood the consequences of their words. Within those folded pages lay the real reason behind her father's banishment, one that had nothing to do with guilt and everything to do with control. The letter, signed by a high-ranking royal advisor, revealed a plan executed in cold precision. It spoke of containment, of protecting the crown's integrity by removing problematic figures from the royal spotlight. Andrew's downfall, it said, was not an accident born of scandal. It was an orchestrated maneuver to safeguard the future of the monarchy. The tone of the message was chillingly detached, almost clinical in its cruelty, as if it were discussing the removal of a pawn rather than a human being. As Beatrice read, her hand trembled not from fear, but from disbelief. For years, she had defended the institution, convinced her father's exile was justified by circumstance. Now, that belief shattered in an instant. The more she read, the more horrifying the implications became. The letter hinted that Andrew's so-called voluntary withdrawal was planned months before the public knew anything, It described private votes within the royal advisory circle, subtle manipulations of media coverage, and the quiet signing of internal documents that guaranteed her father's permanent exclusion. It even suggested that certain senior royals' names Beatrice recognized instantly had supported the motion, fearing that Andrew's continued presence would jeopardize the smooth transition of power to the next generation. The words burned into her memory. He must not return. His shadow will taint the light of the crown. Overwhelmed, Beatrice turned to the one person she thought she could trust, her mother, Sarah Ferguson. But when she showed her the letter, she was met with tears, not surprise. Sarah had known something. Perhaps not the full story, but enough to understand the danger of the truth. She begged Beatrice to burn it, to forget she had ever seen it, warning that exposing it would destroy what little peace their family had left. "They will come after you," her mother whispered, her voice shaking with a mother's fear. But Beatrice couldn't. The truth was too heavy, too cruel to remain hidden. She realized that silence had protected everyone but the one who had suffered most, her father. In the days that followed, Beatrice battled an inner war that no title could shield her from. Her sense of duty clashed violently with her conscience. Could she remain loyal to a system that had betrayed her blood? The monarchy had demanded silence, but her heart demanded justice. Each night, she replayed her father's quiet endurance, his refusal to speak ill of the institution that had raised him. It broke her to think that his dignity had been exploited, that his faith in the crown had been used against him. The letter had changed everything. It wasn't just evidence, it was a mirror reflecting the cost of royal obedience. At last, Beatrice made her choice. She would not let the truth rot in secrecy. No amount of royal protocol or polished lies could undo what she now knew. She decided to reveal what the monarchy had done, not for vengeance, but for redemption. She wanted her father's name restored, his story heard, and the hypocrisy of those in power exposed. Even as her mother pleaded once more for silence, Beatrice's resolve only deepened. She realized that the real betrayal wasn't in speaking, it was in pretending nothing had happened. But exposing the truth came with a cost, and it would drive a deep wedge between Beatrice and the rest of the royal family. Royal unity has always been an illusion, a fragile performance for cameras and tradition. But when Beatrice spoke, that illusion shattered. Suddenly, the palace was divided, siblings turned against one another, and private resentment spilled into public fury. What began as a daughter's desperate defense of her father quickly evolved into a royal crisis that no one could control. Behind the gilded gates, loyalty fractured, and the unspoken rule of silence so central to the monarchy's survival was broken beyond repair. For the first time in decades, the family's war was no longer hidden. It was echoing through the halls of power, leaving no heart untouched. King Charles's reaction was swift, but far from composed. Reports from those close to him spoke of disbelief, then anger. To him, Beatrice's words weren't just an act of defiance, they were an act of betrayal. His rule, still fragile and scrutinized, had depended on maintaining the illusion of order after years of scandal. Now, one of his own had ripped open an old wound for the world to see. He called her statements misguided in private circles, yet his tone betrayed more than frustration, it revealed fear. Fear that Beatrice's emotional honesty might awaken sympathy in the public, undermining the authority he worked so hard to restore. For a monarch trying to distance himself from his brother's disgrace, Beatrice's outburst was nothing short of a nightmare. And then there was Queen Camilla. While Charles wrestled with the optics, Camilla saw the situation through a sharper, colder lens. Those close to her claimed she quietly advised the king to act decisively, warning that letting Beatrice's words linger unanswered would erode the crown's credibility. She reminded him that compassion had limits, especially when the family's survival was at stake. Behind closed doors, she lobbied for silence, pressuring Charles to issue a private warning to Beatrice, perhaps even cut her access to royal privileges. For Camilla, emotion was weakness, and Beatrice's display of it threatened to unravel years of carefully managed stability. Prince William, however, faced a different battle. He understood the political stakes but couldn't shake the moral weight of Beatrice's confession. Her pain, her honesty, it all mirrored the same struggle he had seen in his own mother years before. Still, as the future king, his duty came first. He knew the monarchy couldn't afford another public implosion, and Beatrice's defiance risked reopening wounds that the institution had barely managed to close. His frustration wasn't born from cruelty, but from necessity. He needed the crown to survive. Yet, that sense of duty placed him at odds with his cousin, a woman he had once trusted. And in the middle of it all stood Catherine. Her empathy toward Beatrice's courage caused a quiet tension within her own marriage. Catherine understood what it meant to be silenced by expectation, to carry pain behind a composed face. She reportedly told close friends that she felt for Beatrice, calling her brave but tragically alone. Her sympathy, though never spoken publicly, didn't go unnoticed. It deepened the rift between her and William, two people now divided not by love, but by the impossible choice between truth and tradition. Outside the palace walls, the world was split. Some hailed Beatrice as a symbol of honesty and strength, a royal who dared to break the chain of secrecy that had long defined her family. Others saw her as reckless, accusing her of betraying the very system that gave her privilege. Social media ignited with debates, headlines screamed of royal division, and for the first time in years, the monarchy found itself on the defensive. But amidst the chaos, one voice remained hauntingly silent: Prince Andrew's. The man at the heart of it all retreated even further into obscurity, vanishing from public sight as if consumed by his own exile. To Beatrice, that silence spoke volumes. Her father's disappearance wasn't out of shame, it was obedience. He was doing what the institution demanded, remaining invisible, even if it meant dying quietly in the shadows of his past. Yet Beatrice couldn't ignore the feeling that her father's exile was not the end of the story. Something deeper was at play, something orchestrated and deliberate. And as she stared into the growing storm, one haunting question refused to leave her mind: who truly ordered her father's banishment, and why now? Few outside the palace know of its hidden machinery, the council of advisors that controls the monarchy's survival behind closed doors. Known only as the Sovereign Circle, this group's influence runs deeper than any royal decree, and Beatrice's revelation has exposed its most dangerous secret yet. For decades, the public believed that the monarch ruled through tradition and wisdom. But within the royal walls existed a shadow council, a collection of aristocrats, advisors, and long-serving aides whose loyalty wasn't to blood, but to the crown itself. They operated in silence, ensuring that nothing, not even royal emotion, would ever threaten the institution's power. Beatrice's discovery of her father's letter had cracked open a door that was never meant to be opened. In her search for the truth, she stumbled upon references to this elusive council in documents, correspondences, and confidential briefings written during the Queen's final years. It was during that period, when the late monarch's health was quietly declining, that the Sovereign Circle grew bolder. With the Queen too frail to oversee every decision, they began to act independently, approving strategies, making alliances, and preparing for a transition they feared would be turbulent. Behind the facade of continuity, they were already shaping the next reign. Their reach extended far beyond ceremonial influence. According to one document Beatrice found, they were the architects behind some of the most controversial royal decisions of the last decade. It was they who drafted the internal memorandum suggesting that Prince Andrew's removal was vital for preserving institutional continuity. The letter outlined that public sacrifice is sometimes the price of royal survival. Of that moment, Beatrice understood what had truly happened. Her father hadn't been punished for his mistakes. He had been used. His downfall wasn't simply damage control, it was a calculated offering designed to shift attention away from others whose names could never be spoken aloud. The deeper she went, the darker the pattern became. The Sovereign Circle's fingerprints were everywhere. On the decisions that shaped Charles's early days as king, on the quiet restructuring of royal finances, and even on the manipulation of media narratives that painted Andrew as the sole embodiment of royal disgrace. Their purpose was to protect the image of the monarchy at all costs, even if it meant destroying one of its own. Beatrice realized that her father's silence wasn't weakness. It was the result of pressure so immense that no royal could resist. The sovereign circle had ensured his obedience by making it clear that one wrong word could bring ruin not just upon him, but upon his daughters as well. As she pieced the fragments together, fear began to consume her. This wasn't just about her father anymore. It was about the entire system that governed their lives. She began to wonder who within the family truly held power. Was her uncle, King Charles, the master of his own rule, or merely a figurehead guided by the same hidden hands that had orchestrated Andrew's exile? The more she questioned, the clearer it became. Her father had been sacrificed not for justice, but for political strategy. He was the scapegoat that kept others' secrets buried, but Beatrice's quiet investigation hadn't gone unnoticed. The royal household began to close ranks. Advisors warned her to stop digging. Her meetings were monitored, and several of her father's old associates suddenly refused to speak. Anonymous letters arrived at her home, reminding her of her duty to the crown. Yet, even as the pressure mounted, Beatrice refused to stop. She couldn't live under the same lie that had destroyed her father's spirit. Her defiance wasn't rebellion, it was justice long overdue. And as whispers of her findings reached the media, the monarchy braced for another storm. The sovereign circle's existence, once buried under layers of secrecy, was now at risk of exposure. For the first time, the people glimpsed the machinery that truly governed the monarchy, a silent empire within an empire. But as Beatrice fought to defend her father, another truth began to surface, one that reached back to the Queen's final days. Before her passing, Queen Elizabeth left behind one final instruction, a command sealed within the royal archives, accessible to only 3 people. What Beatrice found in that message not only revealed the Queen's sorrow, but also confirmed her awareness of Andrew's secret banishment. It was a revelation that reshaped everything Beatrice thought she knew about her grandmother's final days. For years, the family had spoken of the Queen's dignity and restraint, but within those private words lay something else entirely, a confession wrapped in regret, written by a monarch who had witnessed her family fracture in silence. The document was brief but devastating. The Queen's handwriting, steady yet weary, spoke of her heartbreak over the choices that had been made in the name of duty. She acknowledged that the punishment imposed upon Andrew had gone beyond what she had intended. "A mother forgives," she wrote, "but a crown remembers. And perhaps I have let the crown weigh too heavily on the man beneath the title." Those words cut through Beatrice like a blade. They revealed a grandmother caught between her love for her son and her obligation to the institution she had vowed to protect. It was an admission that the Queen, bound by duty, had silently grieved the price her family had paid for the monarchy's survival. As Beatrice held the letter, tears blurred the ink on the page. It wasn't merely an archival note, it was the Queen's final act of love. Through it, she discovered that her grandmother had tried, in her quiet way, to protect them. There were mentions of instructions left for trusted aides, ensuring that Beatrice and Eugenie would never lose their royal dignity despite their father's disgrace. There were even suggestions that she had hoped, one day, Andrew might be granted redemption when the storm has long since passed. But that chance never came. The very people who were meant to carry out her wishes had buried them instead, fearing that compassion would weaken the firm image of the monarchy. The emotions overwhelmed Beatrice. It was as if her grandmother's spirit had reached out from the the past, to give her permission to finally speak, to finally stand for truth. That letter confirmed what she had always sensed, that her grandmother had not been blind to the injustice that had befallen her father, only powerless to reverse it without endangering the crown. Beatrice realized that the Queen had died carrying a burden she could never publicly confess, a monarch torn between the demands of history and the love of her own blood. When word of the document began to leak online, it sent shockwaves through Britain. Social media exploded with speculation, and whispers of the Queen's final command spread like wildfire. People began to ask whether the late monarch had been silenced in her final months, her intentions altered by those around her. Some praised Beatrice for uncovering the truth, calling her the only royal brave enough to defend her grandmother's legacy. Others accused her of exploiting private grief. But no matter how divided the opinions, one thing was clear: the narrative surrounding the Queen's reign would never be the same again. Inside the palace, chaos erupted. Senior courtiers scrambled to contain the fallout, denying the existence of any such command. Official statements dismissed the reports as fabrications, while legal advisors warned that any release of private royal documents could constitute a breach of national security. But it was too late, the damage was done. Beatrice had unearthed a truth too powerful to bury. Her grandmother's words were out there, echoing through every corner of the monarchy's carefully guarded world. And in that moment, Beatrice knew that she had crossed a line from which there was no return. But what Beatrice didn't expect was the retaliation, the royal machine turning against her with ruthless precision. The monarchy doesn't forgive easily. Once Beatrice broke her silence, she crossed an invisible line. Suddenly, invitations disappeared, royal protection was reduced, and whispers began that she'd been cut off for disloyalty. It was a modern exile wrapped in royal politeness. Behind the elegant smiles and polite statements, the palace had already begun its quiet retaliation. Beatrice's decision to expose the truth wasn't seen as courage, it was seen as betrayal. The royal institution, famed for its subtlety, didn't need loud punishments. It simply erased her presence, one public appearance at a time. Within weeks of her revelation, palace insiders began to send warnings. Anonymous messages, subtle hints, and quiet reminders reached her through trusted contacts. "You've said enough. Don't push further. The crown always protects itself." These weren't threats, they were promises. Beatrice knew what they meant. She had seen it happen before to others who challenged the establishment. But this time, it was her turn. Invitations to high-profile royal engagements she once attended with grace and pride suddenly stopped arriving. Official photographs excluded her name, her seat at family ceremonies left unassigned. The message couldn't have been clearer: she was no longer one of them. The isolation grew worse with each passing week. Public appearances, once filled with flashing cameras, now turned into awkward silences. Even her husband, Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi, found himself drawn into the quiet storm. Friends whispered that he had been cautioned against supporting her too publicly. Business partners received discreet calls, warning of complications if he stood by her decisions. Beatrice's marriage, once a private sanctuary, became a new battlefield. Edoardo tried to protect her, assuring her that truth would prevail, but even he couldn't shield her from the institution's reach. The same invisible network that had buried her father was now suffocating her life piece by piece. For Beatrice, the emotional toll was devastating. She had always been the quiet one, the dutiful royal who followed protocol and avoided controversy. Now, she was being cast as the rebel, the ungrateful princess who turned her back on her family. The pressure was unbearable. Those who had once smiled at her now looked away in corridors. Even her closest allies within the royal household were forced to distance themselves. It was as if her name had become forbidden, her existence a reminder of a truth no one dared to acknowledge. Nights grew longer. Sleep became rare. The weight of betrayal, not from strangers but from her own blood, began to break her spirit. The one person who tried to reach her was her sister, Eugenie. She begged Beatrice to reconsider, to meet with the palace quietly and mend the rift. But the damage was already done. Their once unshakable bond fractured under the strain of divided loyalties. Eugenie believed peace could be restored through silence. Beatrice believed silence was the very reason their father had suffered. Their love for each other remained, but their paths had split, one toward reconciliation, the other toward resistance. For the first time, the sisters stood on opposite sides of history. Outside the palace walls, the public began to take notice. Supporters rallied behind Beatrice, calling her brave and principled, while others condemned her as reckless. Newspapers ran stories about her exclusion, about the invisible punishment that no one dared to name. As the monarchy maintained its eerie silence, outrage grew. What began as a private dispute had become a moral reckoning, a question of whether the royal family's image mattered more than its humanity. But the louder the world spoke, the quieter the palace became, tightening its hold on secrecy and control. And yet, even as the walls closed in, Beatrice refused to be silenced because she knew one last secret that could change everything. After months of silence, a single recording surfaced, a confession from Prince Andrew himself. His words didn't just vindicate Beatrice. They exposed the monarchy's darkest manipulation, revealing the heartbreaking truth about who orchestrated his downfall and why he was never meant to return. It was a voice long buried by shame and silence, now emerging with the weight of decades of secrets. The recording was raw, trembling, and heavy with regret. Andrew spoke not as a prince, but as a man betrayed by the system he once vowed to protect. His voice cracked as he admitted that his exile hadn't been a consequence of misjudgment alone. It had been a carefully executed plan, one that he was powerless to stop. The confession began with a haunting admission. "I accepted what they told me because I believed loyalty would save me. But loyalty to the crown is not the same as loyalty to truth." Those words echoed through Beatrice's mind as she listened, her heart breaking with every pause. He revealed that during the storm surrounding his public disgrace, he had been approached by senior figures within the palace, who offered him two choices: resign quietly or be permanently cut off and discredited. The decision was presented as mercy, but in truth, it was control. "They wanted a sacrifice," Andrew said in the recording, his voice filled with despair, "and I became the easiest to offer." But the most shocking revelation came when he named the shadowy forces behind his downfall. He confirmed what Beatrice had long suspected. The Sovereign Circle, the same covert council that had guided royal strategy for decades, had chosen him as the scapegoat to preserve others' reputations and solidify the new reign. He hinted that certain figures close to the throne had orchestrated the process, ensuring his disappearance would pave the way for a clean transition. It wasn't scandal that destroyed him, it was design. The monarchy's survival demanded a villain, and he had been chosen. For Beatrice, hearing her father's voice again was an emotional reckoning. It was as if years of silence had cracked open all at once. The man she had defended, doubted, and wept for was now speaking the truth she had fought so hard to uncover. She cried as she heard him mention her and Eugenie by name, his tone softening when he spoke of his daughters. "I stayed silent to protect them, but perhaps my silence has only hurt them more." In that moment, Beatrice realized that her father's loyalty to the crown had cost him everything: his honor, his family, and his peace. The recording didn't just confirm Andrew's suffering, it also revealed the Queen's awareness of his ordeal. He spoke of a private conversation with his mother in her final year, a conversation that now carried new meaning. "She told me she was sorry," he said, voice breaking. "Sorry for what was done in her name, sorry for what she couldn't undo." That confession sent shockwaves through the family. The Queen had known. She had grieved silently, trapped between the love of a mother and the weight of the throne. It explained her final command, her hidden sorrow, and the compassion Beatrice had uncovered in the archives, everything connected. When the recording leaked to a select group of journalists, the palace moved swiftly. Lawyers were mobilized, statements were drafted. Royal aides called it fabricated audio, a cruel imitation. But the authenticity was undeniable. Forensic experts verified the voice as Andrew's, and within hours, clips of his confession were circulating online. The monarchy's attempt to suppress it only fueled public outrage. People demanded answers, and suddenly, Beatrice was no longer the voice of rebellion, she was the voice of truth. Though the world watched in disbelief, Beatrice stayed silent. She didn't speak to the press or issue a statement. Her silence, this time, was not submission, it was triumph. She had what she needed. Her father's own words had freed him in a way no royal pardon ever could. The monarchy's power had always been rooted in secrecy, but now that secrecy was unraveling, Beatrice understood the magnitude of what had happened. The truth was out, but it was far from over, because even truth has a price. and what happened next would redefine Beatrice's place in royal history forever. She began as a loyal daughter. She ended as the woman who defied the crown itself. Princess Beatrice's decision to expose the truth came at a cost no royal could bear: exile, heartbreak, and the loss of everything she once knew. But in that sacrifice, she gave her father what the monarchy never could: redemption. What started as an act of love became a declaration of independence, a final rebellion against the silent chains of royal duty that had bound her family for generations. Beatrice had stepped beyond the gilded walls of privilege, and though she walked away with nothing, she carried something the monarchy had long forgotten: integrity. In the months that followed the release of Andrew's confession, Beatrice quietly withdrew from public life. No press conferences, no official statements, no appearances at royal events. Her name faded from palace schedules, her image from official portraits. It was as though she had been erased, rewritten as a cautionary tale for those who dared to challenge the institution. Yet, away from the cameras, her absence spoke louder than any royal address could. She had become a living reminder of what the crown feared most: a royal who chose truth over obedience. The silence surrounding her was deafening, deliberate, and heavy with unspoken judgment. Meanwhile, the media painted her as both villain and victim. Some outlets called her reckless, claiming she had shattered royal unity for her own emotional vendetta. But for many across the world, Beatrice became something far more powerful: a symbol of courage. To the public, she was no longer a princess defined by her lineage, but a woman who had risked everything to defend her father's dignity. Newspapers described her as the quiet martyr of Windsor, while editorials questioned the monarchy's moral authority in the modern age. For the first time, it wasn't the crown controlling the narrative, it was Beatrice, through her silence, who dictated the world's perception. Then came the letters. Hidden from the press, known only to a handful of trusted friends, they revealed a side of Andrew few had seen. In one, he wrote simply, "You gave me my voice back." It was the confession of a father who had spent years buried in shame, now able to breathe again because his daughter had spoken when he could not. These private exchanges between father and daughter became the heart of their quiet redemption. Though their reunion never reached the cameras, it happened in private, a single meeting away from the palace, where years of silence were replaced by tears and forgiveness. It was not the grand reconciliation the world expected, but it was real. In that moment, Beatrice's battle had meaning. Inside the royal household, however, her defiance left deep scars. King Charles remained silent, his advisors urging distance to preserve the monarchy's stability. Camilla avoided any mention of Beatrice in public, while William and Catherine, torn between empathy and duty, maintained an uneasy neutrality. The institution chose silence over reconciliation, believing time would erase the memory of Beatrice's defiance, but it didn't. Public sentiment had shifted. The people saw in her the reflection of something raw and human, the struggle between love and obligation, between truth and tradition. In the end, Beatrice's name became more than a royal title. It became a statement. Her story was taught as the tale of a daughter who refused to let her father's legacy be defined by others. While she lived in quiet exile, her influence rippled through a monarchy forced to confront its own humanity. Some said she destroyed what her ancestors built. Others believed she gave it a soul. Either way, her decision changed everything. And as the palace gates close behind her, one thing becomes clear. The age of blind loyalty is over, and the monarchy will never be the same again. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.